Well, this talk is really about aspects of English as spoken in Ireland, and hopefully there'll be some mention of how the Irish language has influenced some aspects of how we speak English in Ireland. It's actually quite difficult very often to show how one language has directly influenced another. There's always ambiguity, there are always grey areas, and very often you're never sure which way the influence happened, from Irish to English, or actually from English to Irish, so it's quite mixed up. This is just to confuse you from the very outset. All the languages, or most of the languages across Europe and India are called Indo-European languages, and they can almost all be traced back to a mother language, a proto-language. But the Irish language has been a language in its own right from the very early years of the first millennium AD. So around about 100, 200 AD, Irish was a language. You can see the Celtic branch here. Irish was a language. The English language didn't actually come into being as a separate language until much, much later. English is a Germanic language. And Old English sort of kicks in sometime after 1300. So Irish had been a long, separate, independent, fully formalised language for a long time before the English language came along at all. Actually, the Irish language had a standard written language before the English language existed, which stretched all the way through Ireland and up to the very north of Scotland. You had a standard written language in Irish at a stage whenever the English language didn't even exist as a separate language. So the two languages belong to two different branches of the Indo-European family, and they're very, very different. And we will see some of the differences. Languages are basically all about people. So in any language, language contact, one group, one person coming into contact with another will bring about some change. Very often the changes are in how we pronounce words, the sounds, the phonology. I mean, I'm speaking to you here today because most of you don't come from where I come from. I'm changing how I speak so that most of you will understand most of what I say. You mightn't all understand everything I say. So we change how we speak, we change how we pronounce words. And we pick up items of vocabulary from people we're speaking to. You know, we all know what glasnost is, we all know what perestroika is. Through the news, we pick up new words. Grammar and syntax, probably a bit more complicated, but we'll have a look at that. But as I say, languages are essentially human. They're all about mixing, all about mingling, all about getting on with people. Languages were never used as barriers to separate people. There were always ways of communicating. And languages are constantly changing. Any language that isn't changing is dead. There's no such thing as a language except a computer language or an artificial language. There is no natural language that isn't in a state of change. Now, whether or not you think that change is for the better or for the worst is a different matter. You know, there are language purists who would like things to stay still. We would all like to speak Irish and hear Irish the way Shawson Green would have spoken it. Doesn't happen, not very often anymore. Languages change over time. Language changes as well through geography and through social strata. You can pick up somebody's social background from how they speak. You can pick up where somebody lives from how they speak. And as I say, the whole notion of language purity is a very vexed issue. You know, in France you have l'Académie Française who would like to banish certain words to the dustbin. They never will. Nor will we in English, and nor will we in Irish, unfortunately. But, the difference between language and dialect is also very complicated. And I think I read somewhere once that a dialect with an army and a navy is a language. You know, language is very political, and we know that here. We don't need a lesson on that. But no two people speak in the same way. You know, if you phone a friend and you know your friend doesn't answer the phone, you generally can recognise that it's a brother, or you know, not the person you want to speak to, even though they live in the same house. So there'll be no great regional difference. But no two people speak in the same way. So we all have an idiolect. That's the idiolect there. So language, dialect, idiolect, very complicated and not straightforward and not very interesting. The European dialect continua. As I said, languages are all about people. Maybe you can't see this too well, but trying to point out here that you know languages do not follow political boundaries. As you move across from Portugal to Spain and to France, you won't come across two villages that are near each other where people, one crowd speaking Portuguese, another speaking Spanish, further north are speaking French. There won't be any great difference on the ground from how people speak. In school, they learn different official languages. But you have these sort of dialect continua. Germanic, Slavic, and Romance. So languages don't follow boundaries. People mix, people speak to each other, people get on with each other, and people understand each other. And when we talk about continua, you would never have two places anywhere in the West Romance dialect continuum. You would have nowhere where two villages wouldn't understand each other. Even though one speaking Spanish, the other speaking French, one speaking Spanish, the other speaking Portuguese officially, they always understand each other. So languages are all about communicating, getting on with each other. And before you came here, I was talking to a gentleman at the front about the differences between Irish and English. And Irish is, as we've already seen, a Celtic language. English is a Germanic language. And they're very different. And initially, whenever somebody comes to speak, or to learn Irish, for example, if you spend too much time thinking about the grammar, you can get bogged down in the grammar, and you can forget about communication. Irish, you know, is a language where the verb comes first. VSO, verb, subject, object. So Irish, the Celtic languages are generally VSO. English is a subject, verb, object language. So it can be a bit awkward. Usually it's not the sort of thing that causes a problem. And it isn't the sort of thing where Irish is going to influence English or English is going to influence Irish. They'd be different. It's such a fundamental difference that one won't ever change the other. You'll never have a native Irish speaker who'll put a subject first because that's what they hear. It just doesn't happen. We have a system in Irish of initial mutations where the first sound of a word can change. So the word for a woman, ban, could be ban, can be an van, or can be man. So there's three different sounds. And again, it's very regular and it crosses all the Celtic languages. Irish, like the Celtic languages as well, has a whole system of prepositional pronouns, which is very different from English. And it isn't the sort of thing, it's so fundamental that's going to change from Irish into English or go from English into Irish. It's so fundamental to the Irish language that it's not going to change. But the influence of English on Irish is huge, especially at the level of the vocabulary. And you'll have Irish speakers who will use English words, purely an English word. For some reason in Donegal, people never would use the word Bwanish for a wedding. Perfectly good word, they all know it, but they always, you know, wrote a wedding and yeah. I think wedding is a bit more glamorous or something than Bwanish, I don't know, but they always talk about the wedding with no change at all. They will stick the Irish ending af and the IL onto the end of an English verb. They'll ask you things like enjoy to nihe. That's perfectly natural. And it's awful. But that's the way the language is going. You can like it, you can dislike it. It's inevitable, it's going to happen. So at the level of the vocabulary, you will get changes. As I say, at these other levels, you won't, in either direction. And as I say, you can like the changes or you can loathe the changes, but the changes are coming. As a country, Ireland has had a very, very complicated linguistic history. And if you go back as far as the Viking invasions, for example, you know, they came, they wrecked, they went away, but they left a huge linguistic legacy in terms of place names. And you have place names like Leaslip and Limerick, and you know, very, very strong Viking influence. The Normans, the Anglo-Normans, you know, and in a certain way they became more Irish than the Irish, and they didn't so much bring in French as they adopted Irish themselves. The first recorded use of English in Ireland dates back to around the 13th century, not long after English actually was a language in its own right. Then we had some of the big political changes when Irish started to decline as a spoken language in Ireland. Going back to the beginning of the 17th century, when you had the flight of the Earls, then you had the plantation, then you had in the 19th century the famine, and the famine hit rural areas and Irish-speaking areas especially sorely. And from the census of 1851, you can trace back the rapid decline in Irish. Although the last native speakers of Irish in the north were actually in the 1960s, late 1960s, in and around the Sperrins, Tyrone and Derry. But one of the sad things is that it's now hundreds of years since any word came into the Irish language from any language other than English. So you can look at the language of the church, for example, going way back to the earliest days, all from Latin. You can trace back place names to Viking influence. There are all kinds of Norman words, French words, and Irish. But for about 400 years now, not a single word has come into Irish from any language other than English, which is a bit unusual. If we look at the sounds of English across the north, and you'll recognise where I'm coming from here. If you look at the word, I mean, most of you will pronounce the first word there as something very strange to me. You'll all say, a cat. And to me it's a cat. So you have the cat. So you have the cat garden, where you have the g, or you have coast, guzzle. For most of you, the G and the C there will be the same. For me, they're very different. Now, that's it's interesting in itself, but it doesn't really say much about the Irish influence on English, because in Irish, the word car and the word car are two different words, and they have two different meanings. So in Irish, although the two sounds exist, they don't overlap at all. They're very, very different sounds, and they will change the meaning of a word. Where in English, you know, cat, garden are the same word. We all understand them. We all know it's the same word. So it hasn't really come into English from Irish, we don't think. It's a kind of a... if you then look at words like boar, car, deer, where you have this R, all over Ireland, all over Scotland, many parts of America, and in Irish, the R is always pronounced. So the English language in Ireland is called our rhotic language. We pronounce our R's, where in most of England they don't. They would have boar, car, deer, they lose it. And you'll very often hear English people who have learned Irish, and they'll talk about ta fa, I can do it. They struggle with the R. They just can't do it. We then have the A in words like M-A-N and B-A-G. Again, they're strange. For most of us, it's going to be man and bag. And the A and the A are the same. But it isn't always the same. I mean, there will be people in Belfast, especially Belfast, who would pronounce M-A-N as Mon. Who's your Mon? And that's where, and it's regular, it's before an N. You know, it's not as if you make these rules up and they chop and change. It's very regular. Language change is regular. And B-I-G in Belfast, parts of Belfast will become big. And again, before the G. And it's interesting that in Irish, sometimes A becomes E. So there's a place outside of Claudia, for example, N-E-S-S. How would you pronounce it? Most people say the Ness woods. Locals would say the Ness woods. Yes, the Ness. Because it comes from the Irish word as-e-a-s, anyas, which means a waterfall, which is the biggest feature in the Ness woods. Ness. Where before Ness, especially in East Ulster, the A sound became E. Bag, beg, as, s. Very sort of similar. But again, it's hard to say did one influence the other, but it's interesting that it's happened in both languages. So man becomes sometimes man, bag becomes beg, got sometimes becomes gat. What have you got? It's almost as if man and got sort of swapped around, and black becomes black, and I get black off. Where the becomes a. These three here are strange because, well, I worked for a long time in Belfast, and very often I could not understand the difference between the local pronunciation of those three words. To me it seemed like fur all the time. To me they're very different. You know, I would fair, fur, fur. They're just black and white, day and night. Where in Belfast, for some reason, they'll fall together. And way over in the east, well, southeast, around Armagh, sort of, you know, they wouldn't. That's the same word. So the second one there should be border. It should be B-O-A-R-D-E-R. Border and border. They say border and border. So they've become more and more like, even on the board there. Up in the north west, where I'm from, you know, face, tape and waist, they all become, they change drastically. People would try to talk about fists, your fists. Tip, not tape, but tip. And your waist. Waist. We were going on a trip, actually from, I worked in St. Mary's for a while, St. Mary's College, and we were going away, and one of the lecturers asked me, what did that student just say? The student she was hanging out the window, shouting at somebody else, and she said, don't forget and tip nibbers for me. Don't forget and tip nibbers for me. So again, that's a very sort of established sound change. You know, the A becoming E. Face, fist, tip, tip, waist, waist. And a strange one that's been recorded recently is, especially again up around the Derry area, is where father and mother, for some reason, seem to become faller and muller. The TH is becoming almost L, which is father and mother. It's almost like child language that sort of seems to be taking hold. And talking about taking hold, we then have the OLD, you know, which again, up around the northwest, cold becomes cow. Hold becomes how, old becomes how, told becomes how. Very regular. You know, these are not just changes that were brought in to make people sound silly. Very, very regular changes. And then we have the whole notion of the epenthetic vowel, where you get a word like F-I-L-M, and to your English, speaker of English, it's a film. Where in Ireland we're inclined to say film. And that LM would be a place in Irish where you would get this epenthetic vowel, this vowel to sort of break up the L and the M. And that seems to be coming in from Irish. But again, who knows? Then we get a process known as metathesis, where we get the sounds of a word in the wrong order. And it sounds like child language. You know, but it's more than that. Where you, instead of biscuit, you get bistic. Instead of modern, you get modern. Instead of spaghetti, you get biscotti. And you'll hear people in Donegal in Irish talking about the bicycle. Instead of their bicycle. Bicycle. We then have the WH at the beginning of English words. And what happens to WH, especially in Irish speaking areas, where you would have in Donegal, people talk about fwat and fwy instead of what and why. But they pronounce the H. It's the WH that sort of throws them. And you'll get somebody going to a bar and asking for a what and white. So, you know, what can white.
So, Slavic influence? Slavic influence?
You then have standard and dialect forms. And at the beginning I talked about the whole notion of linguistic purity, you know. And linguistic purity, I think, is largely a myth. It's an illusion. It doesn't really mean an awful lot. I mean, the word forgot generally now is used as a past participle. You know, I had forgot. I forgot all about it. You know. But we often use the word forgotten. You know. Got. Again, you know, would be usually in America it tends to be gotten. But we would all talk about ill-gotten gains. Not ill-got gains. No, we know when to use it. So it's regular. We know drunk, and we know drunken. And again, we know when to use them. You know, you were talking about a drunk man. But if you were talking about, if you were to finish with I'll get, you would say, I'm drunk and I'll get. You know, we know when to use them, and they're appropriate in their place, they're right in their place. Hoof and hoofs versus hooves. Again, that's changing all the time. Roof and roofs. Now, I was shocked to find that roofs isn't accepted anymore. It's now roofs. I mean, wrote and writ. And you'll hear people saying, I had writ 4 times before. And that would have been right 300 years ago. We still talk about a writ as a noun. You know, you go to the pool and I what? I dived in or I dove in?
Dived.
Yeah. Well, it used to be dove, now it's dived. It's becoming more regular. You know, languages tend to become more regular. And irregular verbs tend to stay irregular because we use them so often. They're very, very common in all languages. We all know about seen, done and went. Or saw, did and gone. Where had you gone? Them and those we mix up. You know, we don't really work too well with them. And use, ye's and yins. We have all kinds of ones. You know, and again, in Irish we have two and we have shiv. You know, 2 separate words, singular and plural. But, you know, whether or not this reflects that or not, who knows. When it comes to grammar, in Irish we have 2 different present tenses, especially as verb to be. So we get a sentence like, he's not here just now, but he's here every Monday. Or he's here every Monday, but. So, He's not here right now, and an English speaker of English would say, but he's here every minute. To our ear, that's strange. We don't like the two he's. Because one is he's right now, the other is he be's, or he does be. And in Irish, the same thing happens. You know, we have two different present tenses, and they'd be used in the same way. It's lovely now, but what does the weather be like in winter? Where your English speaker would say, what's the weather like? Just the ordinary verb, the word is. I don't be at myself until after dinner time this weather. About 43 different things you can talk about there. But I don't be at myself. You know, at myself. This weather, where weather can mean time. My mother used to call a child who would be crying an awful lot a garret the weather. Take that bloody garret the weather out. You know, where the weather meant all the time to her. And him something. She walked out and John took him while John was talking. Perfectly natural in Irish. He landed in and him roaring drunk. The phone went and me in the middle of my dinner. You know, and something ing. And him while he was. And that's perfectly acceptable idiomatic Irish. You get extra marks for it. Irregular verbs, as I've said already, are irregular, but they're irregular because they're so common. Things that aren't common tend to become regular. So, the most common verbs tend to be irregular in all languages. But even among the irregular verbs in English, you have this sort of movement towards making things even simpler. So you have the contrast do, did, done, nowadays, all over Ireland, tends to be do, done, done. So, I've done the dishes, you know, and we don't like it, and it's not nice, and it's, you know, it's perfectly natural, and is it hard to understand? Why do we sort of not like it? But we don't. See, saw, seen. Again, that three-way contrast becomes see, seen, seen. I seen them last night. Go, went, gone tends to be go, went, went. And where you have a two-way contrast in English, the irregular verbs, come, came, come, tends to be come, come, come. Run, ran, run, tends to be run, run, run. When I heard a fellow saying once, he run in and the rain running out of him. He run in. Not he runs in, he run in and the rain running out of him. Prepositions, we talked about this sort of problem that Irish has with prepositional pronouns. Where Irish uses prepositions much more often than we would use them in English. And if you were to count the number of verbs you have in Irish, there are much less verbs in Irish than there are in English. We tend to use the same verb with a different preposition, and it changes the meaning of it. So we use prepositions much more often. And you'll hear Irish speakers of English saying things like, have you brought your coat with you? Or, have you your coat with you? Which is perfect Irish. Well, the chota yet. Have you your coat with you? Now, sometimes, as I say, we feel the need to stick in a verb there. Have you brought your coat with you? What would the English speaker of English say?
Do you have your coat?
Well, or have you brought your coat? Would we feel the need to stick on with you? Where it's already understood. He let her roar out of him. Like she baked us. Again, lovely Irish. She's living here from, she married. From. Oh, was she? I'm after telling him. I've just told him. And you wouldn't want to go down there on the day that's in it. I was in law telling him. Given the day that it is. And that tends to come from Irish, we think. And the one preposition that causes more trouble than any others would be the preposition on in Irish, because on in Irish tends to be associated with disadvantage. Something's wrong with you. If you're at a disadvantage because of something, it's on you. See? And very often you can translate these word for word into Irish, and I have a wild ruth on me. In Irish, thirst and hunger are on you. Ta tartar, ta acras on. He broke my front window on me. Rishin in the Cassian. But what is on? If you were translating the on me there into French, or German or Spanish, what does it mean? It's he slammed the door on me, but not literally. My wee dog died on me. What does on me mean? It's more emotional than anything else, and you can't translate it. But I was ready to go out the door, and the cow calved. All kinds of uncomfortable pictures. So on, and it's 100% exactly the same in Irish. So it's almost certainly from Irish, but hard to know. But we're inclined to stick but on at the end of a sentence. We already have, he's not here right now, he's here most Wednesdays, but. Almost as if but can go, it's meant to be a conjunction. Whenever is another word that causes all kinds of trouble in Ireland, because I think the example I had once, my husband died whenever I was living in the Antrim Road or something. The husband died whenever I was living, and whenever tends to be a regular thing. Whenever I see you next, we'll do it. When you come round again, we'll do, but it's not meant to be for a one-off. So whenever we lived in Antrim Road, every time we lived in Antrim Road, my husband died. And yet, and we haven't quite got our heads around the difference between yet and still, and we tend to use yet all the time. And there's a story about a young doctor working as a locum in a practice somewhere, and he came into the old doctor, and the sweat was lashing on him, and he came in a panic, and he asked the doctor, "Doctor, where's your yit?" The doctor looked at him and says, "What are you talking about, where's your yit?" And he says, "There's a woman came into the surgery there." She said, "She fell into a thorn bush 3 days ago and there's thorns in her yit." I wasn't quite sure where to look. So there are still thorns in it. Some Irish words, perfectly good Irish words, have moved and been accepted, moved into the international English-speaking and wider arena. So you get the word boran, for example, the drum. Brogue, meaning a shoe, and also how you speak. Collie, or Colleen, or whatever, however they pronounce it. Dig, now, again, and digitation, is meant to give us, do you understand? I don't know. The jury's out in that one, but Galore, one of the greatest films ever made, of course, Whiskey Galore, wasn't it? Yeah. And, Whiskey Galore, not galore before, but as it would be in Irish, after the now. A gombeen. And we all know that a gombeen would be a personal term for somebody, it's not a very nice term. It wouldn't be a term of endearment. Somebody calls you a gombeen, you wouldn't be saying, "Go on, you take another wee drink." And it's one of the Irish words for interest, and it was used of people who were lending money to people who really couldn't afford to borrow money, and then charging them extortionate rates of interest. Poaching, we all know what poaching is. Slogan, Slua, 2 words in Irish, and Slua would have meant Slua is a crowd, and the Garam call, the call of the crowd, slogan. Smashing, what's smashing? A smashing. Now, it can't be used in the same way in Irish. You know, we talk about having a smashing time. You couldn't use a smashing there. You know, we've adopted it and then changed it. Smithereens and twig on. It was a long time before it twigged on. T-U-I-G, twig. Doesn't sound the same, but I think there's more chance of tig coming from my, twig on rather than dig. I think there's a better chance of that being Irish than the dig one. But and there are an awful lot of words. I'll try to finish here. I was told to speak for about 40 and leave about 15 minutes for questions. And if I can't answer the questions, there's nearly always somebody there who can. We'll fly through these. These are really easy ones for us. We all know what a barnbrack is. It's a wee group from Belfast, of course. Could neither sing nor play. Or barnbrack, a speckled loaf, or speckled loaf, barnbrack. Big or great, meaning meaning friendly, meaning friendly. You know, we should eat them more here. They were always well big. All those two families were always well big or well great. They're always great friends. You know, straight from Irish, we should eat them more here. Brahan, porridge, yeah, porridge. Bum, and bum can mean two different things apart from where you sit. It can mean two different things in English. Well, yeah. Think about
Lord.
Somebody's always boasting. Yeah, he's always bumming about himself. Bumming, that kind of bumming.
And they're do well with it, bum. No?
Yeah, or to bum money. You know. Bumming. How would you pronounce the next word? Call or cal. And you know, there's no cal for that. You know, there's no cal for that. And cal is correct because cal in Irish means need. There's no need for that. There's no cal for that. And I used to teach in a place up on outside Derry, and I heard teachers telling youngsters off for saying there's no cal for that. There's no cal for that. Just speak properly. There's no call for that. What's the next one? Cap? Cap and sheep or cap and beasts. I was driving to pick my wife up from work one day and this boy stopped me and he says, there's cattle get into my granny's field or something. He said, would you stand there and cap the beasts if I chase them down to you? And these big cows come running at you and you're meant to just sort of, you do this here and they turn. They magically turn, they just know. They don't go over you. But cap a beast, and cap in Irish means catch. You know, cap. Clabber, we all know what clabber is. What is it? Lady Muck from Clabber Hill. My mother would talk about anybody was all dolled up. Oh, look at her. Lady Muck from Clabber Hill. Doubt. What can we say about doubt? You say, I doubt that. Oh, I did it. I finished it. I doubt that. Absolutely no doubt about it. You know, no, you did not. Now, how would you pronounce the next word? Dunghill. Anybody else?
Dunkel.
A dunkel. I've heard dunkel. Duhel. And again, whenever my mother, I used to be a wee tiny sort of timid fella, and he came in from the seat crying, and my mother would say, we a duhel, you give us peace. Duhel. Or it was a coward, she was saying. You know, way out you're a coward and fight your own battles. Duhel. And it's interesting for two reasons. In Irish, the word for a dunghill is carneally. And in parts of Ireland, they use carneally for a coward. So carneally fir would be a coward, you know. And also in East Ulster, well, when I say East Ulster, anywhere out of Donegal, the NG in the middle of words tends to disappear. So you get the word, say in Donegal, the word to tie Cangle. C-E-I-N-G-I-L. The word for an angel, angle. I-N-G-E-I-L. Tend to become Kyle, iron. The N-G disappears. And very often, as I say, in this word here, the N-G disappears, and you do get dull. So the meaning and the sound, very interesting. How would you pronounce the next one? You see, to me, that's a foot. It's not a foot. But that's footer. You know, what are you footering at? Footer. You know, in Irish it's F-U-A-D-R. Footer. This one is gab, meaning Gansey. Jersey. You see if one there too is ganch. What's a ganch? A mouth. You know, somebody who's an awful ganch never shuts up. Nobody else gets a word on sideways. And it comes from the Irish word canch. Now it can't be used in the same way. But the next one then in Irish it's Garen. With us it tends to become Cairn. Complaining. You know. Or, you know, you get the word in Scotland, and, you know, in Scottish areas of the north here, they talk about the word greet in the same way. You know, and I heard somebody talking once about, oh, your man's an awful, what is he? He's like a Christmas card, that's what it was. He's like a Christmas card, he's a greeting. You couldn't make him happy. So Gairn, got it. Hames, and mess, made an awful hames or something. Happen. My granny, you know, if you were looking for something, my granny used to say, where's the woman changed her first happen? I had no idea what she was talking about, but I knew that she didn't know where it was, or she wasn't going to look. Hippen was an old English term for a nappy, to do with the word hip. Something you tied around the child's hips. So where's the woman who changed her first happen? Disappeared. Join. I'm not sure how local join is, but to me join, you know, way back in the early days of the Troubles, there was a camera crew down at the bottom of the street I lived in, and they were crowding young for us throwing stones. And the camera crew didn't get the young fellows who were throwing the stones, but they got a woman whose window they broke. And she was out brushing up the window, and the reporter asked her what happened. And she says, there were a crowd of young fellas there taking stones. And that threw him for a start, because, you know, they had to be Catholic stones or Protestant stones. Pagan stones was... crowd of young fellas pagan stones. Crowd of young fellas pagan stones. And I came out and joined them. And of course, he thought she came out and she was throwing stones too. Where joined to her meant scolded them. And to me, we join to scold somebody. Not quite sure where it comes from. But to join somebody. Kitter. Kitter in Irish. Kitter, meaning your left hand. Kitter. Yeah. Or let on. Legort. You know, pretend. Puss and smut. Yeah, both here. Yeah, puss. And when I've heard people say, take that puss off you. A big, angry, unhappy face. Or smut, take that smut off you. Scrake. Scrake at dawn. The Irish verb scrake is scream. But scrake and chilly, cock, crow. Stir.
Smell?
Not a smell so much. Dust, dry, very dry dust. You know, to raise a stir, cause a commotion, but it's dry dust, dry, dirty dust. Team. It was teaming where they had teaming. Or, you know, you team a boat. The boat's leaking, you would team the boat. Or whenever I was younger, that doesn't happen now, but my mother used to team the sports. Yeah. You know, team them. Thole. Endurance, yeah. And I mean, I think thole is a lovely word. You know, it's a really old English word, and it's hardly used at all now, both as a noun and as a verb. My mother used to say, "Men have no thole," because they had never born a child. How would you know what pain is? Men have no thole. Or she would say, "You can leg it or thole it." Nowadays we say you can leg it or lump it. Where does lump come out of? I don't know. But it's dying out. Thran. Obstinate. Yeah, upward. Headstrong. There's a pub outside Derry called Thran John's. And you only have to meet him once. Just the once. I think that's them all. So, we talk about, as I say, language purity. And I'll finish on this. Language purity. But I think if you do listen to people speaking naturally in English, the kind of expressive use of English they have, and it's dying out, I don't think it's to be criticised. It's very rich, I think. I once heard a woman from Tyrone talking about a friend of hers, and she was a very, very big woman, and the friend of hers was a very, very small woman. And the small woman came round to visit her one night, and whenever she was in, the skies opened. It was a lovely night when she came in. She was wearing her shirt, and she was heading out home, and the rain was bucketing down. And the big woman said to her, "Here, you can borrow my coat. It'll drown you, but it'll keep you dry." That kind of expressive English, I think, we should write it down, record it, because it's in one more generation you won't ever hear it. Mutual understanding. Language has always been about understanding people, not about building walls. Not about building walls, but building bridges. That's why languages are always changing, and the language that isn't changing is dying. And both English and Irish are changing in very different ways. Whenever it comes to the need for a written standard, I think we can all make a case for a need at a certain level for a written standard. If we were to read a school inspection report, for example, and we have 3 inspectors here in the front row in case you didn't notice them. If they talked about the Waynes were very well behaved, mightn't go down too well. We would expect to see children. But there are certain contexts when Waynes are fine. Where it's actually at times better than children. So there's a need for a standard, but we should never forget about the rich language that we do speak naturally, and we don't need to change very often. So that's all I have to say. Does anybody have any questions? And we'll try to find somebody here that might have an answer for you.